Hey, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday night. And that only means one thing. It's time for RVing in New England. My name is John DePietro. It's a pleasure to have you join us tonight on this very special show. I do want to tell you that Bob Zagami is home, and he is back from Italy, and he had his back surgery today. So he had said to me this morning before he went in that he would try to get a laptop set up in the recovery room, but I don't think that the folks at the hospital wanted him to do that. But we've got a great show lined up, and we've already got several people that are joining us. And again, as usual, feel free to type in your question. And when you see the guests that we have tonight, I know that you're going to have some very special questions because we have, in fact, a very special guest. And I want to bring him on to the screen in just a few seconds. But let me tell you that if you've heard songs like Lady, Lucille, Islands in the Stream, then you know who our guest is. And he is none other than our friend Chuck Jacobs. And Chuck, welcome to RVing in New England.
Hey, thanks, John. I've listened to your show several times, and surprisingly enough, I enjoyed it. I'm not necessarily an RVer in my off time, but I've spent a lot of time on the road. And so it's interesting to hear about what other people enjoy doing with their RVs.
Exactly. And you know what, Chuck? I don't know if there's anybody in our audience that will have the same IRV, if we want to call it RV, that you've been living in for the past just about 20 years, or even more than that, 20 years. But I know that most of our audience is fascinated with the big motor coaches, the big touring buses that people see on the highway. And, you know, with that being said, I'm going to have you tell your story in a second, but we want to, Jerry wants to say hello from Cape Cod and welcome, Chuck. And that's from Jerry. We'll have more people as they come on. But Chuck, tell us your background and how you started this Kenny Rogers gig, and then we'll get into the life in the bus.
Right. Well, in 1979, I was living in New York City and playing a jazz trio, and one of the fellows that played in Kenny's band at that time was a good friend of mine. And whenever they'd come to town, I'd go out and just say hi and hang out, got to know the band and Kenny. And so at one point when they decided to add a bass player, they called me up and asked me if I'd like to do it. And that was in 1979 in January. And so for almost 40 years, I've been doing that with the Kenny Rogers organization. It's been a great time. And when I remember one time, Edgar, who was the friend of mine that played in the band, he called me and said, Chuck, you got to get on this band. Kenny just bought a plane. Now, I know that's not an RV exactly, but it was quite exciting at the time to Edgar. He said, you know, it's such a cool thing. You got to come on the band. So when I joined the band, Kenny had a plane that sat about 7 people. I guess maybe 8 because it was 7 people in the band plus Kenny. And every day we would jump on the plane and about 9 o'clock in the morning and fly to the next city and get into some rental cars and go play tennis. That was our morning routine. We'd fly to the next city, get in a rental car and go play tennis. And then later in the day, of course, in the evening, we'd play the show. And the next morning, the same thing would happen. We'd go to the airport, get in the plane, and fly to the next city. So for many, many years, that was our schedule and how we did it. In 82, I don't know who came up with the idea, but one of the guys in the band, I think, said, hey, let's get a bus. Well, we weren't really thrilled about buses at the time. And
we're spoiled.
Because we enjoyed flying. And so, but Kenny was very liberal in his the expenses there, and he allowed us to have the bus. And then if we had a long trip, let's say over 500 miles or so, we would just fly, and the bus would follow us around. So that was about the ideal situation. You know, you could ride the bus and have the camaraderie of riding on the bus together and playing cards and having a beer, that type of thing. And then if it was a long trip, we could fly. So at the end of that year, Kenny said, well, you guys got to make a decision. You're either going to fly or you're going to have the bus. And so we all voted and decided that we would continue to fly. We liked that. That was 82. And as the years went by, and we still continued to fly, mostly with Kenny on his airplanes, it came about in the end of the 1990s. We were working up in New York at the Beacon Theater for about 6 weeks. And he had, at that time, decided to sell his airplanes and get a bus. He decided he wanted to ride the bus. So he said, let's get a bus for the band too, and the crew. So he bought a bus for the band, he bought a bus for the crew, and he bought a bus for himself. Now, the bus he bought for himself, of course, was outfitted in what they call a star coach. And when they do that, you might have seen, you and your viewers might have seen some TV shows where they show these ultra posh RVs, buses that are outfitted. They cost, the bus itself costs a couple $100,000. They'll put $1 million on the interior, So his bus was no exception. It was very beautiful. Had a big lounge in the back, like a master bedroom, and then it had a middle area where a couple bunks for, like, if his kids came out on the road. And then the front was a big lounge in the front. Really nice. Yeah. Now, the band bus was a little different than that because you got 7, sometimes 8 members in the band that would travel on it. So you have to have a bunk for each person. The regular band and crew buses that you see rolling down the road, many times you don't know who's in it because it's just a black bus and with no markings on it. A lot of times they do that on purpose to keep their anonymity and so people don't bother them. But those buses are usually outfitted with the middle section. There'll be a front section right behind the driver. That's the front, what we call the front lounge. And that usually consists of 2 couches facing each other.
Oh, yeah.
And then a section with a table, usually just sometimes for playing cards and sometimes just for sitting at a table. And then a galley area, which usually has a sink area, and then a nice refrigerator, and then a bathroom, and which is only number 1, by the way.
Right.
No number 2 on the bus.
That's the rule.
That's the rule. And then behind that is the sleeping area, and that's where the bunks are. And generally speaking, most buses that you see running down the road for bands have 3 bunks high, and there'll be usually 4 positions. In other words, so 3, 6, 9, 12. Usually about 12 bunks. Some of them, if they have a large group or sometimes a large crew, they'll outfit it for 15 bunks. But usually 12 bunks is the norm. 3, 6, 9, and 12. And so if you're on usually the lowest on the totem pole, meaning the lowest seniority person, will end up being the one on the top.
Okay. Now, John, at the top, is there a little more sway than there is at the bottom? Is that one of the reasons why?
That's one of the reasons. There's 2 reasons why. Usually it's the people that are the least seniority are usually the youngest, and so they can scamper up there better. Yeah. And number two, it's not really the preferred place to sleep, because as you're riding down the road, especially in let's say in the West, and you're going through the desert and the winds really kick around, it moves from side to side quite a bit. And but if you're tired enough, you don't notice it, and you just go right to sleep.
Yeah, yeah. So
probably the best place to sleep is in the middle bunk, closest to the front. Now, the unique part about our bus was that since there was only 7 of us in the band, sometimes there would be 8 of us on the bus. Instead of 3 high, we had our bunks 2 high, two bunks high. And that gave you a lot more height for each bunk. And in fact, there was enough where you could sit up in it. Whereas with the 3 bunk, you couldn't sit up at all. It was almost coffin-esque, and really tight.
So many times
in the bunk, you'd usually have a DVD player and a feed from the satellite dish, so you could watch TV if you wanted to. And most all buses have 2 satellite feeds, one for the back lounge, one for the front lounge, and you could go between those with your channel changer on your unit in the bunk. And then if you wanted to, you can put a DVD in and watch a DVD as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, Jerry says here, another old bass player here. So we've got another bass player. You always run into bass players no matter where you go, right, Chuck?
That's for sure. A week or so ago, we heard the sad news about Anthony Bourdain, the chef that unfortunately committed suicide. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Of course. And the other day on Facebook, I think it was yesterday, I saw a video of him exclaiming how if he had been in a different life, one of his dreams would have been to be a bass player. Isn't that amazing? He said, all this cooking, you can throw it out the window. I just want to play bass for the Beatles or the James Brown band,
Oh, that's funny. That's funny.
It was really surprising. So, yeah, bass players abound, that's for sure. And I've early on in the mid-'80s, I wrote a book on bass called The Bottom Line, How to Be a Success Playing Bass. One of the things I always said about that is bass is one of the easiest instruments to learn how to play, so a lot of people pick it up, but a difficult instrument to master, meaning you got to know what to play and when not to play. Bass is probably the most subtle instrument of the band, because you want to just play what's needed to keep the foundation there at all times.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, many times you don't hear it. You have to look for it. I know many times where I've said, I want to just watch, and if I was on the side of the stage, to see your movements with your right hand, to see if I could hear it from the sound. But when you're working on the side of the stage with Frank, you don't hear the same thing that the audience hears.
That's right. Frank is the monitor mixer on the side. One of the things you find about bass is that you don't necessarily, a lot of people can pick it out, but you don't necessarily know what it is when it's there. But when it's not there, you really know it. You say, what happened? You're missing something.
Sounds a little hollow or flat. Hey, we got 3 questions I want to ask you. And Michelle Fontaine asks, so with 7 adults using the bathroom, any issues? Now, we should also say that sometimes those 7 or 8 adults, some were male and some were female.
Well, there have been times when for a few years, we had a fiddle player on the band, a beautiful young lady named Amber, and she, believe it or not, she just fell into place and was one of the guys, and she was, still feminine, and still we respected her her femininity, but she fit right in with the band, and like you say, everybody did use that restroom, but we all had respect for each other and kept it clean.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Jerry writes, bass players
we just asked the driver to stop at a rest area or a truck stop,
Yeah. And then somebody else asked, Michelle asked, did you guys play New Orleans? And if so, what was your favorite place there? Now, I don't know whether she means restaurant or lounge or that type of thing, but before you go into New Orleans specifically, it should be pointed out that when you guys did a show, you would show up and in the early days go play tennis and then go to the venue, then play the show and then get back on the bus or the plane and go to the next city. So generally, you didn't go to the local.
Yeah, in later years when we were taking the bus all the time, that started in 1999 to present, we would always get on the bus and drive through the night to the next city. And that's because, we have Dracula for driving for us, So
yeah.
He likes to stay up all night. So, but it's easier for the bus drivers to drive at night, so that's why we drive through the night. And but at one point in the mid-'80s, you might find this interesting. It's not so much the bus, but Kenny at that time he had a DC-9 airplane, and we would play a show, let's say in St. Louis, and then after the show, we'd change clothes and get in the limousines and ride out to Kenny's plane, and get in his plane that night and fly back to his farm in Georgia. Athens, Georgia, which was south of Atlanta, about 2 hours. And so we'd land in Athens and get in cars there that he had at his farm. He had a 1,300-acre farm. It was called a farm, but it was just a beautiful estate, and it was a horse farm. And he had a guest house for the band, and there was 7 bedrooms there. So we all had our own bedroom in that guest house. So we'd get off the plane, get in the car, and drive to his farm, get in the guest house, go to bed, and then in the morning we'd get up and we'd either go fishing or ride a horse or just sit around and play video games. And then about 6 o'clock, we'd jump in the cars, go to the airport, jump on the plane, and go to the next city. Let's say Kansas City. And then we'd get in the limo, get to the venue, an arena, and then we'd have dinner backstage, and then wait for the opening act to finish, and then we'd go on and play the show. After the show, change clothes, get in the limo, back on the airplane, and go back to the farm every night. So for 2 weeks, we'd have a 2-week tour. We'd have the same place to sleep every night. That was probably the most unique touring situation that I've ever heard of, and I've ever heard anybody talk about.
Yeah. So let's go back to the bus again.
Yeah.
Let's, for our purpose tonight, let's call it an RV. Generally,
right.
The big one, that the bus that you had for a long time, the green one, the one that's when you and Kenny had the matching buses and you couldn't tell them apart. That was a Prevost.
Well,
right?
Yeah, that's in the early 90s. I'm sorry, in 99, the 2000s, early 2000s, we had actually 3 black buses, and they were all the same look. You couldn't tell one from another, and they were what's called the Prevost H3. The H3 are distinguished from the I can't remember
XL.
the name of the other.
XL.
The XLs, because the H3 is about a foot taller, and so that gave you a little bit more room in the bays and a touch more room in the inside of the bus. But it also caught the wind a little bit more as well.
So you could feel that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Chuck, let me ask you this. During that time when you were, on the bus, it had to be convenient from the aspect of you would come out of the venue, jump right on the bus, and you didn't have the hassle of going to the airport. And the best part was always that pizza that was waiting for you, right?
Well, you're absolutely right about that, and that's one of my favorite things, to tell you the truth. But not only that, but then after the tragedy of 2001, it made traveling on airplanes a lot more inconvenient. And so even if you were in a private airplane, it still was a little bit more inconvenient than doing the bus. So you're absolutely right. And most all of us came to enjoy the convenience of just getting on the bus, going to the next city, and just relaxing. We'd usually, after the show, we'd relax for an hour or two and maybe watch a little TV. We used to play cards years ago, but we never haven't for many years. And but from our bus, you have the driver in the front, and you have the lounge, and then you have the bunks, and then you have a back lounge. So if for some reason, you're not getting along with somebody, you go to the back lounge instead of the front lounge. Or if you wanted to watch something different on TV, like some guys like to watch sports, and so it was always a vote, and there wasn't enough guys to watch it on the front TV, you'd go to the back, or vice versa. Somebody want to watch a movie instead of the sports, they could go to the back and do that. And of course, you have the option to go to your bunk too. But that's why the 2 lounges were very, very helpful. And but I think overall, everybody enjoyed the bus in later years, and it was a lot more fun I say the bus, the RV, the major RV.
Again, for our purposes. Yeah. So in the confines of the bus, or the RV, as we would say, you guys get to know each other pretty well.
That's something for sure. I think I've known a few of the guys through 2 or 3 wives,
Oh,
and I always say that we spend more time with the guys in the band than we do with our spouses,
at the time,
and so yeah, you get to know each. And what I think the biggest skill of being a road musician is to learn how to keep your mouth shut. It's to learn what things you agree with and what things you disagree with the others about, and try not to talk about the things you disagree with.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be most of the guys in our band were mature enough that seemed to work out pretty good. So we were all pretty good friends.
Yeah, and you didn't have, you guys weren't spring chickens by this time. I mean, you're all adults. I mean, Kenny wasn't really 35 or 40 until he made it big, right?
That's right. When he came to Nashville, he was 38 years old. Can you imagine an artist coming to Nashville or any major city and going to a record company at 38 years old and asking them to back him to be a star? I mean, it's just amazing,
Yeah.
Miraculous that he got signed, and then the miracles just started happening after that. It's everybody would say, many people would say, well, he was very lucky, and I think that's true. There is a lot of luck involved, but I always define luck as when preparation meets opportunity.
Exactly. When you work hard enough, you create a lot of luck. Now, in your case there, where you're driving down the highway and you got the big bus, and there aren't many of those. You don't see 50 of them at once. You see 1 or 2, every 100 miles or so. Did cars pull up beside you to, wave to you or ask you what's in? There must have been some crazy stuff that you saw out those bus windows.
Yeah, every once in a while they would. And in our younger days, you saw some moons from time to time there that would they'd be shot out the side windows, to people who were driving by. But sometimes there would be fans that would come up and know who's in the bus, and so they would come up and wave and stuff like that, or hold up a Kenny Rogers album, and to let everybody know that they were fans. And that's, of course, it's a fun time.
Yeah. So, craziest time on the bus. Craziest time. What was the craziest thing that you saw happen? Did you ever get stranded? I know there was one year you got, during the Christmas show, you got kind of, stuck in some traffic.
No, that does happen. There's a number of things. Sometimes it's weather, and sometimes it's mechanical on the bus. There have been a few times when, fortunately, you have a bus driver who's mechanically inclined, and if something happens, they have to get out and actually, because in the middle of the night, it's less likely that you're going to get a repair guy to come out to really know how to fix it. So oftentimes, our bus driver would get out and actually fix the bus to get going again. And that's another reason why we would travel together, is because if one bus breaks down and can't be repaired, then you sort of double up and everybody jumps on the one that does work to get to where you're going. So in that regard, we've been fortunate never to have missed a job, missed a concert because of that. One of the other times I remember, well, I say that we've never missed a job because of mechanical. There was a time we missed, I think, only one, if memory serves, for weather reasons. We were in Detroit, right outside of Detroit, and we were going to, I think, West Virginia, if memory serves.
Yeah, I remember that year.
And it snowed so hard that we didn't know if we could make it. So our lead, at that time, I think we had 2 trucks traveling and 3 or 4 buses. And our lead truck driver took off, and he started off to the highway, and he got to the on-ramp to go onto the interstate, and it was so bad that he just pulled over on the on-ramp and slept there that night, and in the meantime called us to say, we're not going anywhere. So we went back to the hotel that we had checked out of that afternoon, and and said, can we get our rooms back? And they said, well, no, we don't have all the rooms. We've got some, but we don't have all of them. And so I remember the snow was so deep that it was up to our thighs, not quite to our waist, but certainly up to our thighs. And I remember grabbing my bag and trekking through the snow to go into the hotel to see if my room would be available. And so, sure enough, it wasn't. So I had to trek back to the bus and just sleep on the bus that night. And so we didn't make that show. That was the only one I can remember that it had to be canceled, and it was canceled because of weather.
Yeah, I remember there was one show in Lowell where they held it for one day because I got all the way up there, and
I remember that a lot of snow was up there, so they postponed it a day, didn't they?
Yeah, I postponed it a day, and then they had to move another show. There was still flexibility in the schedule, but I remember driving up there. Hey, I see a lot of new people here. Carla, tell us where you're from. Just write in where you're from. Reginald, tell us where you're from. Walter, we know you. You're a good guy. Tracy Knickerbocker. Just type in where you're from so that we know. Last week we had people from Australia, and even.
I should have I've got friends down in Australia. I should have let them know that we were doing this.
Right, exactly. Well, you know what? They can watch it. They can watch it on replay.
I have one friend, Graham. He called me the other night. It was about 9 o'clock at night here, and of course it was afternoon down there, just to say hi, shoot the shit a little bit. It was fun.
Exactly. So, Chuck, what would you say to people that are thinking of buying an RV? And Go ahead.
I have a good friend. I lived in California for almost 30 years, and we just recently moved to Florida. And one of my good friends here in Florida has a 45-footer. It's a gas engine.
Yeah.
And it's a pusher, I think. What do you call that? Class D or something?
It'd be a Class A. If it looks like the bus. Does it look like the bus?
Yeah, it's well, did I say 45 foot? It's probably 40 foot. It's not quite as big as the Prevost. But anyway, he's got double pullouts and everything. So it's a Winnebago.
Slide out. Let's use the right term. Slide out.
Yeah. And he bought it a few years old, and I can go by I don't know if I'm a good one to give advice, but his advice was look around and find one that's a few years old, that's gently used, and you end up getting a really good bargain that way. I know he did. I mean, that was probably those are over 100,000, aren't they? More?
Yeah, depending upon what brand it is. You should certainly say that.
And I think it was only 5 years old or something, and he got it for under 40, I think. So it was a really good deal.
He did a darn good job. Hey, let me ask you a safety question, because here's something that a lot of people are not aware of. Now, most RVs that we're dealing with, they don't have bunks that sleep, toward the front and back like you guys do. Most of the beds are east-west, if you will, going from one side to the other. But say, for example, you want to take a snooze on the couch, while somebody else is. Okay. Should you sleep with your head to the front of the bus, or the front of the RV, or the back of the RV, and then tell us why? Because that's very important.
Well, that's actually a very good question. And many people probably know the answer, but I can illustrate the answer with a sad story. And that was, first I'll answer your question. The answer to the question is always sleep with your head towards the back of the bus. In other words, your feet are facing forward. And the reason is if for some reason you hit something, you might jam your ankles or break a leg at the worst. But if you have your head facing forward, you likely could break your neck. So, unfortunately, there was a band, and I won't mention who it was, but they had there was a couple that come to mind, but they sometimes when you're driving at night or in the fog, the drivers don't see that well, and they came up on a flatbed truck and went right into it, and so even the people sleeping in the bunks got your ankles and legs were jammed, But just imagine if they had their heads facing forward, they probably, maybe very likely, wouldn't survive.
And that's and every RVer should know that if you've got a member of your family or a friend that's going to just say, "Hey, I'm going back and take a nap," make sure they're sleeping feet first.
And even on the beds that are going crossways, I'd sort of angle a little bit, maybe diagonally on the bed, so your feet would be forward.
And Walter asked, "Did you ever perform an Indian?" The answer to that.
I didn't catch the end of it. Did I ever perform
at Indian Ranch? And the answer is yes. You were in.
Say that one more time, John.
Field Inn in Auburn, and it was a Sunday afternoon show, Sunday at 2:00 at Indian Ranch. I know you can't remember every show, but I had a great question for you. But you do remember cities based upon the restaurants and the caterers, right?
A lot of times that's the case. We always said that we were going to write a book, The Culinary Tour of the United States, because we always, in all the different cities we'd go to, we'd find restaurants that we really liked, In Buffalo, of course, we really liked the chicken wings at the originator of the chicken wings, the Anchor Bar and Grill.
Yeah.
And actually, it's just the Anchor Bar. And then in New Orleans, there's several places, but the Acme Oyster Bar is a really great place down in the midst of the city there. And then there's another place in what they call the Garden District called Pascal's Manales that has a famous dish called barbecue shrimp that we loved. And then, of course, on Fisherman's Wharf, the dishes there are just superb, So, and when we go to New York, there's one pizza place. Now everybody's got their favorite pizza place, and many people like Brooklyn is their favorite. But there was one when we were there for 6 weeks that we got used to, called Big Nick's Too, Too. And we would always go there to get our pizza. I think you went there with us one time.
I don't know if I went there. I know I went to the Cottage Restaurant.
That's right. That was another one. That was closer to the Beacon Theater.
Right.
And we went there for dinner one time, I think. Maybe it was on the weekend when we had two shows.
And they gave you wine.
They gave us wine with the dinner, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But
my daughter was with us. She was 7, but she didn't have the wine.
Yeah. Hey, Tom and Connie are from Thousand Island, New York. Just jumped in, and I know Tom's a really good guy. And
Thousand
Islands up almost in Canada, right, Tom? Way up north of Albany.
Wow.
And
it must be beautiful. Must be beautiful up there.
Yeah, and we'll get comments from all over the country when this gets broadcast to other sites. So normally we run just about a half hour, so we're just about there. But Chuck, tell us your craziest RV story in the Kenny days.
Say that one more time. I didn't catch
your craziest bus story.
Oh, let's see. I didn't have time to think of that one. I should have thought one up.
Well, answer that question quickly.
Some of them are X-rated, John, so you can't do all of them that way. Back in the 80s, things were a little crazier. When I mentioned in 82 we had a bus, and I remember we stopped somewhere, and I wasn't the one into partying as much at that time, and so I was sleeping, and then some of the other guys brought some female companions on the bus. And I remember I was in the middle bunk, and
just looking for autographs.
I was half asleep, and my curtain, because we have curtains on the bunks, my curtain flipped up, and some gal's head popped in and says, "Hey, what you doing?" So, I didn't know how to handle that at the time because I'm happily married. Still am, by the way. And but there's been crazy times on the bus, and it's always been a lot of fun. I actually took some videos on the bus that year, and many of the guys in the band had tried to pay me a lot of money for those videos.
Get rid of those videos. Get rid of those videos. So yeah, like Jerry said, like I said, bass players get the chicks. So Jerry's always got the comments to let us get going here. But Chuck, we want to thank you so much. I know I have your website here somewhere for or Facebook page, so people can, if people want to friend you or follow you, Facebook.com, Chuck Jacobs Bass.
Yeah, if you go to Facebook.com/Chuck Jacobs Bass, you can follow me around.
Great, great. So we want to thank you so much for sharing life on the bus. And tell our viewers that we'll be back next week. And Mr. Zagami vows that he'll be back to he vows that he'll be back to speak to us then. He's
sure we should wish him a quick recovery on his back surgery.
For sure. So anyway, on that note, on behalf of Chuck Jacobs, I want to wish you happy RVing, and we will see you again next week. And by the way, folks, please feel free to share this when you see it on your Facebook page. Share it with your friends. Share it with any groups you might belong to. And we hope that we've given you a little bit of a different show tonight. We weren't talking about tires or brakes or jacks or generators, but we talked to the guys that are in the big buses, and hope you enjoyed it. So on behalf of Chuck Jacobs, I'm John DePietro saying see you again next week. Thank you.